France and Britain are drawing up plans to create a pacification force in Ukraine that would rely on Western air power backed by the US. According to the Financial Times, this is necessary to ensure that any ceasefire agreement in Ukraine is respected and to deter potential Russian aggression. The plans, which Western officials say are still in the works, would give Western air forces a bigger role than earlier proposals put forward by European leaders, which would have seen large numbers of troops deployed to Ukraine. Instead, they are relying on an area where Western militaries have a clear advantage over Russia, their air force. Instead, ground forces will be used, at least initially, to protect key Ukrainian assets such as ports and nuclear power plants, the article says. The goal, Western officials said, was to create a powerful deterrent that would effectively dissuade Russia from violating any ceasefire agreement and thus create the conditions for lasting peace in the country. The area where we have a significant advantage over Russia is the air and our ability to respond to any flagrant violations of the ceasefire. It's a punitive approach to be able to punish Russia if that happens, one Western official said. He added that the whole idea is that the challenge will not arise. Officials stressed that the plan needs to be refined and could eventually include the deployment of large ground forces, if not in Ukraine, then on its western borders. Troops on the ground must be prepared to fight to deter, a second Western official said. A third official said some capitals were already discussing the outlines of their proposals with NATO military leaders. It is noted that the mission in Ukraine could be led by the Joint Expeditionary Force, a Franco-British formation that could be commanded from either the UK headquarters in Northwood, London, or the French headquarters at Fort Mont-Valérien outside Paris. Other European countries could also potentially contribute. A fourth official added, discussions are still ongoing with several countries. Different courses of action are envisaged depending on the countries, with aviation playing a role. In addition, EU President Antonio Costa is canvassing the 27 EU capitals to draw up a list of what the bloc is willing to collectively provide to Ukraine in terms of troops and weapons that could serve as security guarantees to ensure compliance with any peace deal. Britain believes that European security guarantees for Ukraine could be provided with significantly fewer troops than the 100,000 to 150,000 previously announced by President Volodymyr Zelenski. As The Guardian wrote, European peacekeeping forces do not necessarily have to be deployed in large numbers on the front line, so their numbers could be tens of thousands of people, or even fewer.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and First Lady Alina Zelenska paid tribute on Thursday to those killed in the country's 2014 anti-government protests. According to Associated Press, Zelensky and the First Lady were seen placing candles at a memorial dedicated to those killed who have become known as the Heavenly 100 Heroes in Kiev. On November 21, 2013, the Moscow-friendly president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, announced he was shelving an agreement to bring the country closer to the European Union and instead would deepen ties with President Vladimir Putin's Russia. Outraged crowds soon filled Independence Square for peaceful anti-government protests. Later, after riot police used truncheons and tear gas to disperse the people, demonstrators set up tent camps with barricades, self-defense units and banners with revolutionary slogans. In response to the police violence, hundreds of thousands joined the demonstrations in early December. The standoff reached a climax in February 2014, when police unleashed a brutal crackdown on the protests and dozens of people were slain between February 18 to 21, many by police snipers. A European-mediated peace deal between the government and protest leaders envisioned the formation of a transition government and holding an early election, but demonstrators later seized government buildings, and Yanukovych fled to Russia. The Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance said 107 people were killed in the uprising.
The biggest source of tension within the Russian elites in 2024 was the purge of the defense ministry. The Moscow Times media outlet recalls that Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was moved to a different post, and several dozen officials were detained over the course of many months, including 3 former deputy defense ministers. The shake-up was likely conceived as a way to improve the management of Russia's ballooning military spending. In order to speed up the process of clearing out Shoigu-era placeholders, the Kremlin opted for a method that could be described as rotation through repression. This is not a new approach, but the scale of what occurred at the ministry is unprecedented. The purge has not only redirected rent flows associated with the ministry, but also led to the dismantling of Shoigu's entire clan within the Russian elite. Although Shoigu seems for the moment to be under the personal protection of President Vladimir Putin, he has been powerless to intervene in unfolding events. The Moscow Times says that the easiest way to understand the purge is to look at the criminal cases that followed the first and most high-profile arrest, that of Shoigu's longtime associate, ex-deputy defense minister Timur Ivanov. Each wave of arrests seemed to lead to new arrests in turn, as well as generate new charges against Ivanov himself. After Ivanov's arrest in April 2024, he was charged with the embezzlement of 1.18 billion rubles or $11.5 million. That was followed by the arrest of 2 other senior officials at the Defense Ministry, Yuri Kuznetsov, accused of selling state secrets to contractors linked with Ivanov, and Vladimir Verteletsky, who oversaw spending on digitization. All 3 men maintained their innocence, and Ivanov's lawyer sought to get him moved to house arrest on the basis that Ivanov was subject to Western sanctions, had participated in military action, and been decorated. Ultimately, however, none of that helped. On the contrary, there was another wave of arrests in July arising from the documents seized by investigators in April. This time, the men who ended up behind bars were Andrei Belkov, a military contractor used by Ivanov, and another former deputy defense minister, Dmitry Bulgakov. In turn, the July arrests led to another rash of criminal cases that encompassed construction and military logistics as a whole. As a result of the arrest of Bulgakov, security officers detained the head of military equipment retailer Vontog, Vladimir Pavlov, and several of his business associates. A third wave of arrests in August included the head of the war-themed Patriot Park, Vyacheslav Akhmedov, and yet another former defense minister, Pavel Popovu, was close to Shoigu. Since then, the arrests have spread to numerous institutions connected to the former leadership of the defense ministry, varying from Rosgvardia, Russia's National Guard, which is also involved in state defense contracts, to a little-known organization, Oboronles, which manages forests on the territory of military bases and supplies timber to the government of the Moscow region. The Moscow Times recalls that in 8 months of purges, therefore, several major rent flows have been disrupted and charges filed against dozens of officials linked with Shoigu across a whole spectrum of different agencies and organizations. Ivanov is currently implicated in 2 criminal cases, and investigators have hinted there may be more to come. Neither Ivanov nor Popov have sought to cut a deal with investigators. By pushing ahead to seize the 2 men's assets, though, it appears investigators want to pressure them to give evidence against Shoigu himself. When given the green light to these arrests, it's possible Putin didn't expect investigators to take to their task with such enthusiasm. But the rivalries between Russia's security agencies run deep, and the Federal Security Service and the Investigative Committee have accumulated many grudges against the military over the years. Evidently, they've decided to take full advantage of the opportunity, both reanimating old criminal cases and opening new ones.